Your 30s start the great separation. It's the time where the gap between people who build wealth and those who wonder where their paycheck went gets a lot wider. And it almost always comes down to 7 specific financial moves that you must do. Most people don't know about them until they're in their 40s or 50s when it's already too late, especially the 4th move. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what you need to do so you don't end up on the wrong side of that gap. Starting with the first financial move, the liquidity stress test. Most people have no idea how long they could financially last if they lost their job tomorrow. So the very first thing you need to do is to take account of how much money you have, specifically in liquid assets. This is basically any asset that can be turned into cash within 1 to 3 days. So this would include money that you have in your savings account, your checkings account, money market funds, and even cash that you keep in a shoebox. The reason this is so important is because you need to know how much liquid cash you have in case of an emergency or an unexpected expense, like when my wheel fell off of my car on a random Sunday and I needed to get it towed to a mechanic on a Sunday, and you know that's premium pricing. The next step is to figure out what proportion of your entire net worth is held in cash. Because despite what most people think, sometimes you can have too much cash and sometimes you can have too little cash. So just like Goldilocks, what is the just right amount of cash to have? Generally, the golden rule here is the amount of cash you have is the total amount of your emergency fund plus any short-term saving goals that you have. For example, if your 6-month emergency fund comes out to $30K and you're also trying to save $5K for a trip to Mexico City next year, then the right amount of cash for you is $35K. Once you know your liquid cash number, the very next move is the exact one that I wish someone had told me about years earlier, because most people have no idea how much money they're losing by keeping what I call lazy cash. Lazy cash is the cash in the savings that you have that's not doing anything for you. So that's cash and savings that's sitting around in your drawers or in your closet, and that also includes savings sitting in a checking account or a traditional savings account. And keeping lazy cash costs you money in 2 ways. Number 1 is you are missing out on the income that it should be generating, and here I'm not talking about investing in the stock market. Number 2 is inflation eats about 3% of its value every year. So if you have 10K in lazy cash, it's essentially buying you about $300 less of real world stuff than it did 12 months ago. The good news is you don't need to risk this money in the stock market to make it work for you and to generate you money, especially since it needs to stay safe and accessible. What you need instead is a simple multi-account cash stacking strategy that maximizes your yield automatically. And since there are a couple of steps you need to do to fully optimize your money, I'm hosting a completely free 4-day Make Your Cash Work workshop. It starts June 1st, and I'll walk you through this entire thing step by step. And no, it's not just opening a high yield savings account and call it a day. You can reserve your free spot using the link below or scanning right here. All right, so the next financial move is to optimize your big 3, which includes your housing, transportation, and food expenses. And is a very big reason why we focus on these 3 items. You see, the most common mistake I see is that people try to save money by stopping themselves from buying $7 iced coffee from Starbucks or getting the new Burger King Whopper. The problem is all that is going to be wasted effort because it's barely going to move the needle. Whereas if you focus on the big 3 items, that's going to lead to the biggest returns. And here's the math to prove it. So let's say you take home $5K a month and your rent is $1.8K. Your rent is already eating about 36% of your entire paycheck. Now let's say you are going to give up your $7 iced latte with oat milk every single morning for an entire year. Doing some quick math, you save around 2.5K a year. Now, what if we just focus on one of the big 3s, right? Let's say you get a roommate or you find a new place that's $180 cheaper down the street. You spend 1 weekend dealing with that entire transition and moving and all that stuff, and then you never have to think about it again. So in about 1 weekend's worth of work, you're gonna be saving around $2,100 a year, which is very similar to the same payoff as stopping drinking coffee for an entire year. Except you didn't have to deplete your willpower and suffer through 365 mornings just to earn a similar amount. And if you actually go for it, right, and put in a lot of effort to reducing your big item, the rent, by 20%, you're looking at over $4,000 a year in savings, which is almost double the amount you'd save by restricting your coffee addiction for one decision that you made once over a weekend. The point is, making effort to reduce your small expenses require constant willpower from you, and it leads to small results. Compared to reducing one big expense requires just one major decision for bigger results. And yes, there is a bit of a trade-off here in terms of your lifestyle, but I think for most people, we're not actively thinking about these 3 big expenses in our day-to-day lives. Paying for housing, transportation, and food is kind of just autopilot in our heads, so sometimes it's really helpful to just reflect on what are some areas that we can optimize. The goal here is to try to save money in bigger areas so you can still have fun and enjoy your life with the little expenses. Alright, so this next move could save you more money than any of the other ones combined. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over your lifetime, and this is called credit score maxing above 800. Most people think your credit score just determines whether you get approved for a mortgage or any type of loan, but it actually determines how much money you have to pay. And the difference between a good credit score and a great credit score is pretty big. So let's say you're buying a $450K house with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. If you had an excellent credit score, you qualify for about a 6.25% interest rate. You'd expect to pay around $2,770 a month, and in over 30 years, that's roughly $547,000 in interest payments. Now let's just say you have good credit, right? Not bad credit, we're saying just average good credit. Now your rate is gonna go up to 7.25%. Everything else the same, your monthly payment now looks like $3,070 a month, and your total interest paid is going to be $655,000, meaning you're gonna pay over $100K extra for the same exact house just because your credit is not excellent. There are 2 easy ways to increase your credit score. Number 1, to keep your credit utilization low, which is basically out of your entire total available credit across all your credit cards and loans, what percentage of that are you actually using at a given time? The trick here is to aim for under 30% utilization, the lower the better. Also, Experian ran the numbers on this. If you got a really solid credit score around 790 and you decide to just max out all your credit cards, right? You use up all your total available credit, you could lose around 110 to 130 points depending on your profile. We're talking going from 790 to 660 just because you maxed out your credit cards. The second thing is to make sure you're paying all your bills on time every billing cycle. If you miss one payment and it goes more than 30 days late, then that can actually tank your credit score. According to Experian, just having a 30-day late payment can drop your credit score of, if you had 780, by 90 to 150 points. And that late payment can stay on your credit report for up to 7 years. The next financial move is probably the most underutilized one in this entire list because most people aren't doing this or aren't doing it correctly, and this is to maximize any tax-free money opportunities that you might have. Some of the most common tax-free opportunities include the HSA or health savings account, and the purpose of this account is to cover health-related expenses. But don't let the name fool you because it's actually the most tax-efficient account available because it offers triple tax benefits. First, contributions are pre-tax, meaning it will lower the total amount of income tax that you would pay. Second, any growth in this account is tax-free. And third, any withdrawals that you make for qualified medical expenses are also tax-free. Next is the Roth IRA, which is an individual retirement account. Unlike the HSA, where contributions there are made with pre-tax dollars, with a Roth IRA, your contributions are made with post-tax dollars, so after you receive your paycheck. The best part here is the profits you make in your Roth IRA grow tax-free, plus you can also withdraw your contributions here at any time. One mistake I see constantly is that people will open an HSA or a Roth IRA, they'll put money in there and then they'll just leave it sitting in cash. But you need to actually invest that money. Now, for most beginners, my suggestion is to look into low-cost index funds. If you don't know what that is or how to invest, I made an entire video on how to invest in the stock market for beginners. I'll link it down below or scan here if you're interested. Next is your 401k, and this is an employer retirement account where you contribute your money pre-tax, meaning before you actually get your paycheck. One thing here is to focus on maxing out your employer's match first because that's essentially free money. These are the big 3 tax advantage accounts, but depending on your situation, there are a few others that might be worth knowing about. For example, if you have kids or are thinking of having kids, you might want to look into the 529 plan. It's essentially a college savings account where the money you contribute grows tax-free. Even if your kid doesn't end up using all the money here, you can roll up to 35K of it into a Roth IRA under their name. The next financial move you should do in your 30s that most people put off because it feels a bit overwhelming, but is actually really important, and that is to create a financial plan for the next 10 years of your life. A good 10-year financial plan tackles a few different categories that are all pretty important. I personally like to use the acronym NEST to make this easier. N stands for your target net worth. You want to pick a concrete dollar amount here that we want to hit by the end of the next 10 years. Avoid being vague here. Just saying I want to be rich isn't an actual number, because every other decision that you make is going to be a lot easier once you have an actual target that you're aiming for. E stands for estate basics, and sometimes it might feel like it's a bit early to think about this stuff, but 3 things that you should have in your 30s are your will, beneficiary designations, and a power of attorney. Especially if you are married or if you have a kid, this is really important. S stands for stages of life, so this includes the big money milestones that you tend to have in your 30s, such as marriage, kids, buying a house, etc. The good thing here is that these life stages are relatively predictable, so we can plan for them by having separate saving goals and separate saving funds for each of these, instead of realizing a bit too late and we have to either sell our investments or take on massive amount of debts when they happen. T stands for tracking, and this is specifically your progress towards your retirement. And even though this is a 10-year plan, we should still know whether we are on pace for the long game of retiring. A rough benchmark from Fidelity is that by the time you're 30, you should have at least 1 times your salary saved. By the time you're 40, you should have about 3 times, and by 50, you should have about 6 times. Even though they are rough benchmarks, it's helpful to see where you actually land against them and figure out if you need to adjust your savings rate or your timeline. All right, so this next one is the single most important thing you must do if you want to build wealth, and it's called savings rate maxing. And I'm not exaggerating how impactful this is. I can actually prove it with math. Let's take 2 people earning $75K a year, and both of them, their goal is to reach $100K in net worth as fast as possible. The first person, Mr. Magic Lamp, he is obsessed with saving, and he puts away 15% of his income every year, but he's only earning about a 3% return a year. The second person's name is Benito, right? My puppy saves almost nothing. Let's just say he saves 4% of his income. But let's say he's a stock market genius and he's pulling in a 12% annual return, which is 4 times higher. So the question is, who gets to 100K net worth first? The answer is Mr. Magic Lamp, and it's not even a close race. Mr. Magic Lamp gets there in about 8 years, compared to Benito, who doesn't even cross that line until year 14, which is about twice as long, even though his stock market returns were about 4 times higher. So the easiest way to figure out what your savings rate is to first figure out how much money you spend. I know spending can vary a lot month to month, so let's take the last 3 months of your spending and then just average that out. Then figure out how much money you earn in a given month. If your income varies, then just take the average of the past 3 months. Now you want to find a difference, so basically how much money you're bringing in versus how much money you're spending every month, and that difference is your savings amount. Now take your total savings amount divided by your income, multiply that by 100, and that is your savings rate. So here on this channel with our community of freedom builders, we strive to have at least a 15% savings rate, which I know sounds like a lot, but this includes retirement contributions, your investment contributions, etc. And something very surprising, so I ran a poll on the community post tab a couple of weeks ago, and it turns out over 62% of y'all save more than 15% of your income, and over 40% of you save over 25%, which is fantastic, but also pretty shocking. If your savings rate is less than 5%, well, take this as the wake-up call if you want to be on the path to financial freedom. The biggest driver for your wealth, especially in the very beginning, is going to be your savings rate, so you want to focus as much as possible on that. But saving more money is only half the equation, because you actually need to have that money working for you without touching the stock market. Somewhere safe and accessible, and I'll walk you through the entire thing in our free 4-day workshop. A link is down below, or scan this. And if you're not interested in that, then make sure you don't ignore this video next, because that's where I show you how to save money so fast that it's almost unfair.